Hi, everybody. Welcome to our guest webinar today. Thanks, everybody that's joined us. If you don't know me, I'm Scott from the British Pest Control Association. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager. I'm just going to be introducing today's webinar. With us today, we've got Hazel, Kerry, and Molly. They're from BEB Consultancy. They'll be talking to us about terms and conditions and contracts. BEB Consultancy work with BPCA quite a lot, and they provide member benefits for our members on particular contracts, look over contracts that you have already, or help you put together contracts that are legal and suitable for use. Today, if you've registered with your CPD number on either Basis Prompt or on BPCA registered, you'll automatically get your CPD point at the end of the webinar. It's also worth pointing out that this talk is particularly suitable for business owners and managers. So if you are a technician, you're more than welcome to stay and listen to what these guys have to say. But you'll probably get the most out of it if you have something to do with the contracts and terms and conditions that your company produces. So that's definitely enough of me talking. So I'm going to pass you over to Hazel now, who will take you for the rest of the webinar. Please make sure that you use the question and answers section throughout the talk, and we'll go through any of the questions and answers at the end. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Scott. Hi, everyone. So Hazel from BPCA Legal Services. We specialise in terms and conditions and all things to do with business contracts. So we write terms and conditions every day when we've encountered numerous issues that businesses have come across, which is why we thought we'd host this webinar today to talk you through some of those issues, particularly in relation to the pandemic at the moment. So I'm going to hand over to Kerry, who's going to talk you through the slides, but please do ask questions as we go along. We want this to be interactive, and no question is too daft. So please feel free to fire away, and we'll answer them at the end. So over to Kerry.
Hello, so yeah, I'm Kerry and I work here at BEB. So I'm sharing my screen with you guys. So first of all, the first slide is why terms and conditions. So we always make it very clear to business owners that terms and conditions should be the first legal document that you put in place when you do start a business. Without having that document in place, you open yourself up to a range of different problems. These can be anything from chasing invoices repeatedly, disputes, or cancellations when you feel you could be in a retained basis and people are just cancelling midway through a contract, or then also dissatisfied customers doing all they can for a refund. If you're very clear in your terms and conditions what your processes are, then there's little chance for disputes arising. I mean, obviously they still can, but when you're very clear and being upfront and honest with your customers, then there's less of a risk there. So many businesses will come to us. It might not be that they've just started, but they've been trading for a little while, and then they think it's now time to invest in actually getting their terms and conditions professionally written. It might be that they seem that they're having problems along the way, or they added new businesses or new services or anything like that. But quite a lot of the time, business owners will say to us that the last time that they got their terms and conditions was they copied them. They copied them from a competitor, maybe somebody that they worked with before, found them on a website or just use a template. And we're constantly trying to encourage people to not use templates and to not just copy them from somebody else. If you're pulling them off from a similar business, it's not going to protect you the way that having them written tailored to your business will. It's dangerous. You may not be able to rely on them in court, and they could be illegal. They may not have even been professionally written in the first place. It's so important to remember that no two businesses are the same. Even though you might be in the same industry, the way you do things can be very different. There was quite a big case that where a business had used a copied set of terms and conditions, and they couldn't rely on them because their business processes didn't mirror what was actually written in those terms and conditions. So that's why it's very, very important to make sure that the way you invoice, the way you quote, everything like that should be mirrored in your terms and conditions. If you don't understand your own terms and conditions, the chances are your customers won't. So again, we've had so many business owners that will come to us and say, don't know what's in them, copied them off somewhere else. Again, it's so dangerous. When you have them written and tailored to your business, we ensure that you have, you're 100% clear on what's actually written in your own terms and conditions. So if any problems do arise, you know exactly how to combat and deal with that situation. A couple of years ago, Seaborne Freight, I don't know if any of you heard about it, it was kind of in the news. They'd basically won a big contract with the government. It was worth about £13.8 billion or something ridiculous. And they came to light more so, not only the fact that they didn't actually have any ferries, but they'd copied and pasted their terms and conditions from a pizza delivery company. And it was, they absolutely became a mockery. They ended up losing the contract, funnily enough. But to us, that isn't unheard of. Whilst that was on a massive scale and it hit the press, it does happen a lot. I read terms and conditions that someone sent over to me, and it will mention things that are not relevant to them at all. And I just think it just shows you off really unprofessional. And it's very clear what you've done. You've copied and pasted them. So another really important factor for having a standard set of terms and conditions that you can apply to every future contract is that it is your proof of contract. Having, an oral contract, they are just as enforceable. And obviously, if you've got emails going backwards and forwards, that effectively is your contract. However, this can still create uncertainty. If you've got one template, one document that you're using for all future transactions, and it covers things such as payment terms, what happens if you can't complete the services, lots of other things that we do talk about on the next slide. You're covering every eventuality, which is something that when you're agreeing via an email or verbally, you're not going to get covered. So we mentioned legal fees, because if there is a dispute and you have to pay a solicitor to defend a dispute or instruct somebody to chase invoices and that sort of thing, having one document is so much clearer for any lawyer to work out what was agreed at the point of the formation of the contract. Trying to go through a whole heap of email trails and that sort of thing, it's a lot more lengthy, a lot more costly. So it's just, it's a no-brainer. And it's much more effective just by having that one document. So when you think about the clauses you might want to consider putting in your terms and conditions, obviously most terms and conditions are going to include payment terms. Again, this needs to mirror exactly what you're doing. So if you are asking for a deposit, your terms and conditions need to state that. If you are, charging on a monthly basis, invoicing on a monthly basis, again, your terms need to reflect that. There's also some standard terms that you might want to include, which will include your late payment. So your statutory right to charge interest on any late payments. You also get a statutory right to charge compensation on any late payments as well. How are they to pay you? Do you take straight payment? Do you do it on an invoice? How many days do they have to pay the invoice? All of that stuff would be covered in your payment terms clause. I mentioned earlier about cancellations. How do cancellations work? Obviously, it depends on whether you're doing things under a project basis. So if you're visiting a site that has just asked you to visit on a one-off site, at what point can they cancel you? Can they cancel you 24 hours before with no charge, or do you like 7 days notice and then you're going to charge them for any visits that get cancelled less than that. You need to be very clear on what your cancellation process is. You know, you need to protect yourself, because if somebody hasn't paid you and you invoice after you're attending, you're leaving yourself open to having cancellations on the day, which is a problem.
It is also worth mentioning that I'd imagine some of you, well, probably the majority of you, deal with domestic customers as well as businesses. If you're dealing with domestic, it's very important that you state the statutory right to their cooling off period. So consumers have the right to a 14-day cooling off period in which they can cancel the contract for any reason. If you don't state that in your terms and conditions, they get an automatic right to extra rights. So we had a case recently where a photographer went into contract with a couple. The couple cancelled at the last minute, but because the photographer hadn't stated in his terms that there was a right to a 14-day cooling off period, the couple got a year and 14 days to cancel, and the photographer had no rights to stand on. So it's very important to consider who your customer is. And if you're dealing with domestic, you've got to factor in consumer rights into your T's and C's as well.
Another point as well, cancellations, you can be thinking on a more long-term basis, they're cancelling either the whole project or they're cancelling the whole retainer where you're going in every month. They might also just want to be cancelling each individual visit, maybe delaying it or rescheduling it, but they want to do it an hour before you turn up, you might already be halfway there. You want to sort of work out how much notice you need before each individual visit as well as the whole contract.
Yeah, absolutely. And that then brings you on to amendments and variations. So if they are amending the contract at the last minute, you need to be able to reserve your right to be able to charge for that, because obviously contracts can evolve over time. What you might quote for at the beginning may change, and time again, businesses are cutting themselves short because they're not factoring in those costs, and kind of they're bringing their contract value down by working more. Similarly with the variations, if you're taking materials or products on site, or you're leaving things on site, it's important to factor into your terms and conditions who actually has the ownership rights to those goods, who has the risks to those goods, which basically means who should be insuring those products. If they're on site, it depends on obviously how high value the products are that you're taking on site. If you're leaving things on site, you want to try and make sure you're limiting your liability the best you can and passing the risk to your clients. As saying about limitation of liability, there's a lot more you can limit your liability for. So sometimes you might consider, if you're going on site and then they might have a contract for you. So if you was to damage something whilst you're on site, you want to make sure that you're limiting your liability to only that damage rather than any indirect or consequential loss or anything like that. Following the law, as Hazel was saying, if you are dealing with consumers, you have to make sure that you are covering consumer law because of the statutory rights that consumers have. When you are dealing with business to business, it's very different. You can get away with a lot more and being a bit harsher to businesses. Force majeure clause is a standard clause that covers and it's in every set of terms and conditions that we do. We call it legalese. You've probably heard a lot about force majeure recently, considering the pandemic that we've been going through. And many businesses have been looking to rely on that clause moving forward. It's Latin for the word superior force. So basically, it means if there's an act of God that's preventing you from doing or completing your obligations under the contract, then you may be able to rely on force majeure. The situation must be outside of both parties' control, and it needs to be unavoidable and unforeseeable. So what that means is that it's quite a high level of proof that you need to prove to a judge, if you was wanted to rely on force majeure, that you literally had no other option but to frustrate the contract. So if you had to completely close down, so if there was a fire or a flood and then the whole building got set on fire or flooded, then obviously the contract can't be completed. In terms of what's been happening recently, you could argue that the building has been shut down due to a health risk or health hazard. But you need to remember that it is quite a high threshold to be able to rely on a force majeure clause. It was happening a lot, again, with consumers. I saw that a venue that was having a festival, they said that they were relying on force majeure, and it meant that consumers weren't going to get their money back, which is absolutely not correct. They can rely on force majeure to not complete their obligations under the contract. However, you know, under consumer law, consumers do have the right to have a refund should the services not be completed, which they weren't.
It's worth saying as well that force majeure it's not to do with the fact that it's more expensive for you to do your job. So it's worth considering that although undoubtedly things have been more difficult for businesses, if it just means that it was harder for you to get materials or you had to import them from somewhere else that you wouldn't normally and it cost you more, that's not good enough to rely on force majeure. So it doesn't matter that it cost you more or was more inconvenient or anything like that. It's literally something that frustrated the contract that was impossible for you, meant that it was impossible for you to continue with the contract. So like Kerry was saying, it's a very high bar that people have they're bandied around these words a lot, and it's actually not something that most businesses have been able to rely on.
Yeah, the same with staff. So if you've got you know, you're using agency staff, or if you've got employees and these employees all were off or they were isolating, you know, you would have to do everything in your power to basically try and hire somebody else, trying to get other staff before you would even be able to consider it being frustrated under force majeure. As I say at the bottom there, so parties seeking to rely on this must demonstrate there is no reasonable alternative. So if it was just a case of staff or supplies, you know, you need to be trying your utmost to complete your obligations under the contract. Another thing that terms and conditions really do is they project a professional image. You're taking your business seriously. You're not looking like Seaborne Freight. You haven't got pizza delivery written all over your terms and conditions when you actually supply ferries. You feel confident in every future transaction that you're working with. The confidence there can then, you know that should anything go wrong, you've got your terms and conditions to rely on. The same as if you've signed someone up on a 12-month retained basis, you know that they're going to be bound by that 12-month term, rather than just moving forward and kind of hoping that it's based on trust and your client is going to continue to pay you, continue to be happy to continue the services.
It works both ways as well. You're proving that to your client that you're going to do what you say you do when you say you're going to do it. And so they, that's what the next slide says actually. So yeah, it says you're going to turn up 12 months, every single month for those 12 months, or you're going to make sure you turn up specifically on time, or you're going to be there for a certain length of time. Anything like that you've put in your terms, they know that they can rely on them.
Yeah, so exactly. So by showing off a professional image, your customers feel confident too. And we have actually had feedback from clients who have said that they've won a certain contract over somebody else because they had the terms and conditions and they looked more in control, and the customers felt confident that they were going to do what they say they were going to deliver. So something that I constantly try and remind my clients as well, that whilst they might have had terms and conditions written by us, it doesn't mean that they're always enforceable. So if you are sending over across a proposal, you attach your terms and conditions and your client accepts. Sometimes they might come back with a purchase order. On that purchase order, we'll have in very small print, subject to our terms and conditions. So whilst you might think that your terms and conditions are the one that are governing your contract here, it's not always the case. What this is known as is a battle of the forms, and it's kind of like whoever had the last say on whose terms and conditions are incorporated into the contract. So if you ever do get a purchase order for your goods and you've sent terms and conditions, make sure it doesn't say anywhere on there that it's your terms and conditions, that it's their terms and conditions that are enforced here. They might have very onerous terms, things like 90-day payment terms, which, it's too long to be waiting to get paid. Consequential and indirect loss. So if you did anything, then you'll find yourself paying for things that are not even relevant to the breach that you've done. Cancellation periods, you might be thinking, oh, they can't cancel you for 90 days, but then their terms will say they can cancel you within an hour. Things like if you can't get access to the building at any time, you should be charging them for that. Their terms may say different. Ownership of products, they might try and take ownership of anything that you leave on site, and those sorts of things. So again, make sure you read the small print, that your terms and conditions are the ones that are in force. If it does come back with terms and conditions from their side, you need to have that conversation. It's always worth negotiating. Take a look at your terms, take a look at theirs, see where the difference is, and try and meet a mutual ground. But do not ever just start the works without having a look, because even though you don't sign it, as soon as you start those works, you've accepted those terms. So you need to be having the conversation. So here at BEB, we do have the support package, which is in-house legal team that support, amend, review and negotiate contracts. So if you are getting those secret contracts passed your way, we can help negotiate those or read through them and check that there's no nasties that could be potentially, making the contract not worthwhile at all. All our terms and conditions are under a fixed price. And we do make sure that you've got one contract that can cover all the services that you offer. What makes us different is that we learn and we listen to ensure that all the terms we write are bespoke and tailored to your business. And more importantly, which I've mentioned before, you need to know yourself what's in your own terms. Because if you want to be able to rely on them, or, moving forward, you want to make sure that you can chase somebody for debt or what have you, then you need to be educated on what your terms are saying. And that's what we here at BEB can offer. And then that brings us to the slide of any questions.
So I did see a question from Simon. He was asking if we've got an example of how we've worked with a BPCA member. I've written some terms very recently for one, in fact, finished them off last week. So he'd actually taken the template. I don't know if any of you have seen, there's a template available that we've put together for BPCA members that deal with consumers. So he'd actually taken the template and he'd had a stab at it, filling it in. But the difficulty was, it was taking him a lot of time. He was a startup and he really wasn't sure where to go from there. So he got in touch with us, and I've essentially written him in a new set. So the template is quite limited in its usage. It's really just for businesses that deal with consumers, so domestic pest control. Whereas he is in fact looking to deal with businesses as well, and so the terms weren't really suited to that. And what we've done is I sat with him and we spoke about every aspect of what he's planning to do. So with his new business, it was saying how are you going to quote for the work? When how will you accept that the customer wants to go ahead with it? When do you expect to get paid? He was doing things like leaving bait stations on site, so he wanted to sell those onto the customer, so we spoke about that. And we added in obviously cancellation clauses, which are very different, as Kerry was saying, for businesses compared to consumers, although we made sure that consumers were also protected. So we talked him through every aspect of the business and created a bespoke set that he can now feel confident dealing with his customers, both business and domestic, So yeah, just the difficulty is most people think that if you're dealing with pest control, then everyone here, your T's and C's can be the same. But that I can guarantee that you will all do something, one process or one service or how you want to get paid. There'll be several things that are slightly different. So that's why it's worth having a real think. And the template is a great starting point. If you've not got it, I'm sure Scott can send it to you, or it was in one of the magazines as well. And yeah, just have a look through that, see if that's a good starting point, because you can do it yourself. There's no reason why you couldn't do it yourself, but you need to think through every aspect of what you do, how you do it, and then lay that out carefully in your terms. Don't think that another pest controller will fit, because you're better off starting from scratch and just literally writing your processes down. That's a better approach. Another question. So all our prices are on our website. So they start from $3.99 plus that. But BPCA members get a 10% discount if you quote BPCA 10. So please feel free to get in touch. Our contact details are on the next slide. But like I say, we're not here to sell to you. We were here to talk you through various clauses that you might want to think about, talk to you about lots of real life scenarios. So we need to have a read through Emma's, because that's quite a large post, and then I'll come back to you. And then there's some Q&As as well that we'll talk to you about in a second. Hopefully someone else has read them before me.
I'll answer the one from Alex. So the 14-day calling off period on domestic jobs, what can be done to protect us if the customer cancels 10 minutes before a high value job? Now, the law does say that you have, yes, so everybody has the right to a 14-day calling off period. However, should you like, obviously 10 minutes before a job, that is actually going to cost you money. So you can still charge if they do cancel 10 minutes before a high value job, but whatever you do invoice must be proportionate and must only be and mitigate your losses. So we would write it in a way to say just that, that you do require a 24-hour notice cancel, regardless of whether you're in a 14-day calling off period or not. Because if they cancel after the 24 hours, there may be some costing involved. Or we can do a 14-day calling off like waiver. So if it's a high value job that they want done quickly, we would always maybe put at the point of sale, you get them to sign a 14-day calling off period waiver, which basically means it's an emergency job. They want you to do it and they don't get their right to a 14-day calling off period. Do you want to do them?
Chris has sort of mentioned how long does it take? Is it expensive to have T's and C's written? We tend to actually work things quite quickly. The way we normally work is have that initial meeting to really understand how you work. Everything we've chatted through, so from quote to payment to cancellation, we'll chat through that. And then it normally takes a week or two to get drafts together, and then we'll have another meeting to run through it, make sure you understand it, make sure you're happy with it, pick up on any changes. So we have wrapped up sort of some people's terms and conditions within a week or two. Sometimes there may be lots of changes, or if it's in a bigger company, there may be sign-offs that need to happen. Then it may take a little bit longer, but we can wrap it up quite quickly. And as we've said, it's all a fixed price, and we think it's reasonably well priced.
And to answer Cliff's question, so when delivering pest control, should you obtain a signature on site for work completed, or does verbal acknowledgement suffice? It's always a good idea to get confirmation of anything in writing. The difficulty with a verbal acknowledgement is that who is your word against mine. So I'm assuming that it's in relation to whether the customer is happy with the work that you've just done. You can have a form that they sign, but again, you don't need a signature for there to be a legal contract in force. People often think that they need to get their terms and conditions signed, or they need to get a contract in place between them, which is 20 pages, or there's nothing legally binding. Whereas in fact, a contract has very few elements in law for a contract to exist. If you think every time you fill up your car with petrol, every time you order something from Amazon, you're entering into contract, you're not signing anything. So it's worth bearing that in mind. And we'll always try and simplify the process as much as possible. But if you're concerned about, say, having delivered the service and then making sure that the customer's happy with it, then it's always better, even if it's just an email confirmation to say, I was happy with the work that was done or something similar, then that's a better idea.
So I think there was one thing in the chat which was it was quite a long message about, is frustration and force majeure the same thing? So force majeure is that superior force that kind of does prevent you from doing the work. So it is that major fire, that major flood, could be the pandemic in certain circumstances. I don't think it will come up too much in your industry, but that is the superior force. And then the frustration of the contract is when it becomes impossible to perform, that you then frustrate the contract and you say, we're going to have to terminate it. So that frustration of the contract is the termination based on the force majeure event.
So the anonymous attendee, so yeah, basically I did cover that slightly. If it is emergency, then we would always sort of try and recommend that you got a the waiver for the legal calling off period, that you do that at the time the contract is formed, because then it kind of just protects you moving forward from that. Orlando, with a domestic customer, 14-day calling off period. What if the customer decides to cancel after the job has been completed? So the 14-day calling off period, it needs to be prior to the services from being carried out. They cannot cancel after. If it's like sort of something that you're doing over a certain amount of time, so maybe it might include 4 different visits, and you did visit 1 on day 13, and then they cancelled again. They could, but you would be able to charge for the services that you have already completed. Again, it's very, very important to get that written down in your terms and conditions, because by having nothing, the customer will have more statutory rights.
Simon's asked if there's been a heavier than normal demand from pest control since the pandemic. I understand you guys have been busier than ever. And we've been incredibly busy, I think mostly to do with people having some time on their hands to think about getting their processes sorted. So yeah, it's a good time if you've got people furloughed, or if you just got a bit more time on your hands. It's a good time to get, just think about how you're doing things. Is there a better way could you improve your quotation process? Could you improve your business processes? And have you got all the legal documents you need? And if not, if you've got some time on your hands, then go ahead and see if you can put something down in writing yourselves, or if you get stuck and you need some help, then you know where we are. Margaret says, if the customer signs the satisfaction form and then refuses to pay, what action can be taken? So it really depends what was agreed in the contract. So if they have said that they're happy with the work that you've done and then refuse to pay, you've got various options. So you can refuse to provide further services. You can start to charge them interest. So that's a statutory interest that you're allowed to charge. And then obviously you're going through the legal route. So you can send them letters before action. You can get someone like us involved. Sometimes a letter on our head of paper will have a bit more weight to it. Or you can, pursue them through the small claims. But it's always going to be a difficulty. The idea of having a good set of T's and C's in place is that it won't get to that stage, and if it does, then if they've got legal representation, they'll advise them there's no point continuing because the contract is so clear on what it says was agreed. So that's why it's always worth making it as clear as possible in your terms what you will and won't accept, so that it just makes it, like Kerry was saying earlier, it will reduce your legal fee significantly if you do ever enter into a dispute. I'm not sure we've got any other questions, so
Brilliant.
back over to Scott.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. That was really interesting. We had so many questions. Thanks everybody that asked a question. Hopefully everybody found that useful. Like the guys said, BPCA members do have access to a simple domestic contract through the BPCA members area, and it's a great starting point if you want to have a look or just compare and contrast against your own terms and conditions. If you want anything a little bit more complicated or something bespoke, or if you just want them to have a look through the things that you've got already, I really do suggest getting in touch. BPCA ourselves have sent bits and bobs over to them as well, so it's been really useful to have BEB on side. So, please do reach out if you are interested in their services. I think that's it for today. So thank you very much, everybody who joined us. Thank you again, BEB. And until next time. Thanks, everyone.